The latest installment of the Dresden Files released last week, and I just needed time to finish it and get in front of the microphone so that I could give you my reaction to it.
The Belated Binge Podcast.
Spoiler free, 12 months. I guess we should start with the obvious, right? We knew going in from all the promotional materials, the title of the book, the idea behind this book was going to be how Harry was able to, I guess, deal with the loss of Karen Murphy from Battleground. So this book spans the 12 months after Battleground took place. And I think it was set up well with Battleground too, because there were a couple of different things that Harry was given basically a year clock on, right? There was Listens to Wind, who told him that he would give him a year to come back to him and let him know what the hell Starborn means. And there was also the year that he had for a forced engagement to Lara Wraith, because Mab decided to play matchmaker against his will. So there were those two nuggets that worked really well to bring on a book to cover that span of time, right? Like, because you could have gone in at least a couple of different major ways with that book and get people all excited, fans like me, speculating what the hell is going to happen in 12 months. So it was smart. It was really well done. And some of the stuff that Jim Butcher has come out with prior to the release of 12 months, I know he did like a Q&A in a Reddit thread that he linked on his website, and I'm sure he talked about this in other places that I'm just not thinking of right now. And he's going on the book tour currently, and I'm sure he's talking about it there. But basically, I guess the idea here was he started writing Mirror Mirror, which was the planned next book kind of all along. And he just kept running into it wasn't working, he said. It didn't make sense because there were like new characters that were going to be involved, and it was like he said it just didn't feel right, essentially. So he put a pause on Mirror Mirror and kind of realized he needed to flesh out that period between Battleground and Mirror Mirror happening, thus the birth of 12 months. And in a lot of ways, this feels like the in-between time that we would normally get from a Dresden book, because as you know, the typical Dresden Files book is the worst weekend of Harry's year. And there's always a period of time between the one book and the next. And usually it averages out to about a year. Sometimes, the next book happens sooner in that following year, sometimes later. So, time can vary. What is time? It's a construct. Are we all just rocks floating? Or no, we're not rocks. Are we specks floating on a rock in space? I don't know. I don't have these answers. What I do have answers to is whether 12 months is a good book or not. That's what we're here to discuss. And I would say, yes, it is. To go ahead and bury the lead, yeah, I enjoyed 12 months. But in a lot of ways, it was refreshing to get that different lens into Dresden's world. Because, again, normally we don't see this part. We see a absolute sprint to an unwinnable battle with hurdles in front of it, and then it's over. And then the next book is that again. And we get mentions, and we get like a little bit of either through the dialogue or through the narration, we get caught up on some of the stuff that happened in between that's relevant to that next story. This book is that time in between before Mirror Mirror happens, which, by the way, Butcher also said he's about 30% done with Mirror Mirror, and it seems like he kind of already knows what the story is going to be. He just needs the time to sit down at his computer and write it after this book tour is over. So it sounds like he thinks that Mirror Mirror is going to kind of just fall out once he gets a chance to sit down. So it's going to go pretty quick, which is exciting. We shouldn't have to wait as long between 12 months and Mirror Mirror to come out, which all of us would love to be the case. So I guess that's my biggest thing on the spoiler-free version of this, like my thoughts on this book is it was very different. The pacing was very different, but it didn't take away from the intrigue of the story. I was a little bit worried about that. Like, and Butcher said again in some of those interviews that he had a hard time writing it. It was a challenge to write it because he doesn't write these long periods of time. He writes the worst weekend of Harry's year. And so he was, worried about whether or not he was going to do a good job of keeping, doing this style, of novel. And I think he did it. That pacing, while it's very different, it still is very satisfying, and also it keeps you interested. It is slower, obviously. You can't sprint through 12 months like you can sprint through 3 days, as we would normally get. But you do have kind of some of those typical Dresden elements in this, right? Like there's, as you would guess, multiple things that he's trying to juggle. It seems like everything is hitting him all at once. The issues are piling up. He's got a never-ending supply of problems to deal with, and he has no choice but to push through and figure it out. And all while he's dealing with the fallout from Battleground, and not just him, but obviously the people around him and the city around him, Chicago. Chicago was basically decimated in Battleground. So it's not a spoiler to say that has an impact on people's lives and what's going on around Dresden. Big shock, right? And we get that in this book, and we get a really, it's a really cool, like development, I guess. And I would say that one of the biggest things about this book that is truly different in terms of kind of the emphasis of the story is more on the characters. And I like that. I appreciate that. I actually, so a little bit of background on me, I guess, is that I am not your typical fantasy nerd. I am a sports person. I am like a nerd about stats and kind of a data nerd in my regular job life, but I've never been a like fantasy book nerd. I am coming to these stories through the experience of hosting this podcast, and am kind of finding a love for this urban fantasy genre in particular. The idea that like the magic is right here with us, and it's fascinating to me. But that gives me a slightly different perspective, I guess, because I'm not here specifically for the supernatural part. Like, that's not the part that I think has me hooked on the Dresden Files. The part that has me hooked on the Dresden Files are the characters. It's Dresden's personality. It's his growth and his snarkiness and his sarcasm and his attitude, like as like a first person narrator of this story. I find him incredibly compelling, and I really enjoy the supporting characters around him, and I enjoy the pacing of the books. I enjoy how he is kind of lining up allies and all the stuff that he gets into, but the monsters themselves are very much secondary for me. Once it gets to like the description of what a ghoul looks like, I kind of like, okay, cool. I do audiobooks, and James Marsters is an absolute masterclass on reading these stories at this point, but like that's not the part that grips me. The part that grips me is that, like, are those characters, it's the implications of what's going on, it's the perseverance, it's the um yeah, it's the story more than the creatures, I guess. And so to have a book that is more about the characters and more about their journey, that appeals to me, and I think it was done quite well. And so I enjoyed this book. There is, I will say, I don't think it's a big spoiler to say that the loss of Murphy is a prevalent part, at least for a portion of this book, in Harry's head. So it's not like cover to cover the most bright and sunshiny book in the world, but it's done well. And like I said, that pacing, it's still gripping. I still, with the audiobook, I got it first thing in the morning when I woke up on the 20th. I put a headphone into my ear and I hit play. And pretty much the entire time that I was awake, that I could be listening, while I was doing stuff. Obviously, if I'm, in a work meeting or something, there are periods throughout the day where you can't be listening to an audiobook at the same time of what you're doing. But the reason I love audiobooks is because I can listen to them doing while I'm doing a lot of things. And so I is in true fashion of this podcast, I binged it in like 2 days. It was I was finished, and I had a couple of short form reviews up for TikTok and Shorts and Instagram and all of that. It was pretty immediate, and that to me suggests that I couldn't put it down. Like, I wanted to know what happened next, and it kept me engaged. It kept me gripped, which is about all I can say for a book, right? For a story, whether you're reading it on pages or listening to it, you want to stay engaged and want to know what happens next. And it's happening throughout this entire book, despite the change in the pacing, because we're covering 12 months and not just a weekend. It's still Dresden. He's still up against a seemingly impossible odds. He still has to overcome them, and yet he's doing it over the course of an entire year. And so you get more detail too. You get more of his thoughts and his process and things like that. Like, you get more insight into that stuff because you have more time to spend with it, and it's really cool. And I feel like that is about about as far as I am comfortable going with this book without doing any spoilers, because I don't even want to talk about like characters showing back up, because I want you to, if you haven't read it yet, I don't want to influence your experience. So this is where the spoiler-free version ends.